Hi, I'm movie man Eric Houston, and today we're going to be taking a look at three of the biggest blockbusters of the 1980s. We're going to be talking Raiders of the Lost Ark, we're talking Ghostbusters, Back to the Future. But before we get into the behind-the-scenes stories of those movies, I want to take a little detour back to 1979 and a not-so-classic movie. You see, in 1979, Steven Spielberg was already riding high on the success of Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, two of the very first major blockbusters that had grossed a combined $378 million in the United States alone. That's roughly $1.5 billion in today's money. Steven felt invincible, and for his very next film, he turned his eyes to the early days of World War II. On December 14, 1979, the 38th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, Spielberg released 1941, a comedy about the aftermath of that fateful bombing. Aside from Spielberg, the film had an enormous pedigree. The cast included John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd, John Candy, Robert Stack, Penny Marshall, Elisha Cook Jr., Slim Pickens, and noted Japanese actor Toshiro Mifune. Today, though, the film is remembered as an unmitigated disaster. It was savaged by critics and audiences, and Roger Ebert, for example, gave it just 1.5 stars, saying 1941 was, quote, an assault on our eyes and ears, a non-stop series of climaxes, screams, explosions, double takes, sight gags, and ethnic jokes that finally was just not very funny. And while the movie would make a small profit, it was nowhere near what previous Spielberg films had made. Now, you might be wondering why, in this class about the biggest blockbusters of the 1980s, we're taking this diversion to talk about a bomb like 1941. Well, the legacy of 1941, the perceived failure of that film, would haunt the three movies that we're going to talk about over the next 10 years. Beginning, logically enough, with Spielberg's very next film. Spielberg had been interested in making a James Bond-style, globe-hopping adventure movie for years. But now, for the first time in his career, he was having trouble finding financing. With his first three films, Spielberg showed an inability to work either within a budget or within a schedule, spending much more money and taking much more time than he'd been allotted. With Jaws and Close Encounters, the results were so fabulous that those problems could be easily overlooked. But with the relative failure of 1941, a pattern was beginning to emerge that no longer seemed worth ignoring. For his next film, the studios wanted a guarantee besides just the Spielberg name. His ultimate solution? To team up with the only man in Hollywood more successful than he was, George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars. Hollywood might have been ready to at least temporarily turn its back on Spielberg, but it couldn't ignore Spielberg and Lucas together. For his part, Lucas had been thinking about making a modern film about the sort of two-fisted adventure serials that he'd enjoyed in his youth. He'd already had success updating sci-fi serials like Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers with Star Wars, but now he wanted to make a movie that echoed the sort of jungle adventures like Zorro, Spy Smasher and Terry and the Pirates. Or rather, he wanted to see a movie like those movies. He wasn't especially interested in making it himself, as he was much too busy with the Star Wars sequels. But he knew that Spielberg would be the perfect man to make the idea a reality. And when he shared the idea with Spielberg, Steven loved it. Lucas's idea was for an archaeologist named Indiana Smith. Spielberg, however, didn't like the name Smith, and so the two settled on Jones. Indiana, meanwhile, came from the name of George Lucas's dog, an Alaskan Malamute who was also the inspiration for Chewbacca. To help them pen the screenplay, they turned to writer Lawrence Kasdan, who had just written a script called Continental Divide, which Steven had purchased to produce. After spending a long weekend creating the major beats of the story, Kasdan was left to tie it all together into an actual script. Along the way, he added a lot of humor and wit to the character, while also making him less the noble and pure hero of those old serials, and more someone like Humphrey Bogart's gruff, complicated character from The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. After seeing a cut of Lucas's Empire Strikes Back, Spielberg was convinced there was only one man to play Indiana Jones: Harrison Ford. But Lucas was reluctant. He really didn't want to be seen as a director who only made Harrison Ford pictures. Several actors were considered and auditioned, including Tim Matheson, who'd had a big part in 1941 but was probably best known for Animal House.
I've learned to hate you in these last 10 years, but no matter how much I hated you, I always knew someday you'd come through this door. I never doubted it. Something made it inevitable. So why are you here? Now. Tonight.
Lucas and Spielberg were particularly bullish about Tom Selleck, then an actor with numerous TV roles under his belt who had nonetheless yet to hit it big.
Look, I did what I did. I don't expect you to be happy about it. But maybe it can do us both some good.
Why start
Just
now?
shut up. Shut up and listen to me. Now, I need that piece your father had.
In short order, everyone agreed that Selleck was the right actor for the part. There was only one hitch, which was that several months earlier, Selleck had starred in a pilot for a TV show called Magnum P.I. for CBS, and was technically still on contract for that show. No one was terribly worried, though. The pilot had sat on a shelf for months with little to no interest from the network. Still, Spielberg and Lucas were eager to begin filming, and so they contacted CBS with just 10 days left to go in Selleck's contract, asking them to release the actor early. Well, unfortunately, this tactic sort of blew up in their faces. Upon hearing that these two film titans were interested in him, CBS decided that Selleck must be the next hot new actor, and decided then and there to go ahead with a series order for Magnum P.I., which would prohibit Selleck from shooting Indiana Jones. With Selleck out of the running and only weeks to go until the start of filming, Lucas finally agreed to approach Ford, who enthusiastically accepted the part.
No time to argue. Throw me the idol. I throw you the whip.
Give me the whip.
Adios, señor.
For the female lead, Marion Ravenwood, Spielberg wanted to cast someone in the mold of classic Hollywood stars like Irene Dunne, and offered the role to his then-girlfriend, Amy Irving, but she was unavailable. Barbara Hershey was also considered, and actress Sean Young even filmed several screen tests. But the role eventually went to Karen Allen, then known for Animal House.
Indiana Jones. Always knew someday you'd come walking back through my door. I never doubted that. Something made it inevitable. So what are you doing here in Nepal?
I need one of the pieces your father collected.
The role of Indy's friend Sala was originally written with Danny DeVito in mind, and DeVito very much wanted to do it, but was committed to Taxi. Instead, the role went to British actor John Rhys-Davies after Spielberg saw him in the TV miniseries Shogun.
They're digging in the wrong place. I am the monarch of the sea. I am the ruler of the... Bad dates.
Much of the exteriors were shot on location in Tunisia, where the weather was oppressively hot, often reaching 130 degrees. And the vast majority of the cast and crew succumbed to illness from the local cuisine. Spielberg was one of the few who didn't take ill, but only because he subsisted entirely on canned foods that he had flown in from the United Kingdom. Ford himself contracted dysentery, and rather than shoot a planned, elaborately choreographed sword fight, he instead suggested this memorable moment. The interiors were shot at the famous Elstree Studios in England. Here, huge sound stages became home to Golden Idols, Marion's Bar, the Ark of the Covenant, and all manner of creepy crawlies. Raiders of the Lost Ark was the very first film role for notable character actor Alfred Molina. And yes, all of those tarantulas that you see here are real, placed on his back by a professional spider wrangler. When shooting the scene, though, Spielberg was disappointed that the spiders didn't move. He thought them staying still made them look fake. It turned out the spiders were more afraid of Molina than he was of them. The spider wrangler pointed out that all of the spiders were male and that adding a female spider might just do the trick. He added a female to Molina's shoulder, and to Molina's terror and Spielberg's joy, all of the male spiders began to move, crawling over Molina to reach the female. A snake wrangler, meanwhile, provided the snakes for the famous Well of Souls scene. The crew populated the set with about 1,000 snakes, all non-venomous but still prone to biting. Unfortunately, 1,000 snakes were nowhere near enough to fill the set, and Spielberg complained that he'd be unable to film a wide shot without being able to see all of the empty spaces in the temple where there were no snakes. Assistants called all over Europe and found another 3 or 4 snake breeders who brought with them 6,000 or 7,000 more snakes, covering the floor with their slithering masses. A lax attitude overtook the crew as they poured out buckets and buckets of snakes, and many people did indeed get bit. Fires that were lit around the set to keep the snakes at bay proved to only attract the snakes who were drawn to the fire's warmth. Things turned more serious when a pair of cobras were brought to the set for this memorable shot, which was achieved by placing a pane of glass between Ford and the snakes, and it's a good thing that pane of glass was there. Sure enough, the cobras did strike at Ford, spraying the glass with venom. Raiders of the Lost Ark reached theaters on June 12, 1981, and didn't leave until 9 months later. It was, of course, an enormous success, re-establishing Spielberg's place as the king of the American box office and making $354 million worldwide, and making Spielberg the first director in the history of movies to gross a collective $1 billion at the international box office. 2 enormously successful sequels would follow in the 1980s, with a 4th film released in 2008 and a 5th planned for the near future. The success of Raiders meant that Spielberg was no longer haunted by the failure of 1941. But one of that movie's stars, Dan Aykroyd, was thinking about hauntings of a different variety.
Hello, I'm Peter. Where are you from, originally? Shh. All right, okay. The usual stuff isn't working.
Okay, I have a plan. I know exactly what to do. Now stay close. Stay close. I know. Do exactly as I say. Get ready. Ready? Get her!
The Aykroyd family actually had a history of dealing in the supernatural. Dan's great-grandfather hosted seances in his home. Dan's grandfather tried to create a device that would allow communication with ghosts over the radio. Dan's father wrote a history of ghosts, and Dan himself is a true believer in the paranormal. By the 1980s, Dan Aykroyd was already a comedy superstar. He was an original cast member of Saturday Night Live, where he excelled at creating high-concept sketches and characters like the Coneheads, the Wild and Crazy Guys, and the Bassomatic.
Yes, fish eaters, the days of troublesome scaling, cutting, and gutting are over. Because Super Bassomatic 76 is the tool that lets you use the whole bass with no fish waste without scaling, cutting, or gutting. Here's how it works. Catch a bass, remove the hook, and drop the bass. That's the whole bass into the Super Bassomatic 76. Now adjust the control dial so that that bass is blended just the way you like it.
Terrific bass!
The Canadian comedian was also proving wildly successful in film, including the hit comedies Trading Places and The Blues Brothers, which he also wrote. And of course, let's not forget about his role in 1941. Heck, he even made a cameo appearance in the very first Indiana Jones sequel.
Ah, Dr. Jones, I'm Weber. I spoke with your assistant. We've managed to secure 3 seats. But there might be a slight inconvenience as you will be riding on a cargo full of live poultry.
Is he kidding?
Madam, it's the best I could do at such short notice. Heavens, aren't you Willie Scott, the famous American female vocalist?
For his next picture, Dan was inspired by an article about trapping ghosts from, of all places, the Journal of the American Society for Psychical Research. He dreamed up the name Ghostbusters and began working on a new comedy that he could star in alongside the co-stars of his 2 most successful movies, John Belushi and Eddie Murphy. He saw it in a way as a modern update of the popular ghost comedy movies of the 1930s that had starred the likes of Abbott and Costello and Bob Hope.
Ghost Breakers Incorporated. You make 'em, we shake 'em. Bob Hope speaking.
The first draft of Ghostbusters was very different from the movie we now know. The script was very long, and it was set in the future, a future where Ghostbusters were as common as firefighters. One familiar element, though, that was there from the beginning was a giant marshmallow man.
I tried to think of the most harmless thing. Something I loved from my childhood. Something that could never, ever possibly destroy us. Mr. Stay Puft. Nice thinking, Ray. We used to roast Stay Puft marshmallows by the fire at Camp Wakanda.
Ray has gone bye-bye, Egon. What have you got left?
Sorry, Beckman. I'm terrified beyond the capacity for rational thought.
Like in the movie, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man was inspired by a character from Dan's youth. In this case, the Angelus Marshmallow Man, the mascot for a brand of marshmallows produced by the makers of Cracker Jack. While Dan was writing his initial treatment for the script, he received the staggering news that his friend and partner in crime, John Belushi, had passed away. Shaken, but still convinced that he had a hit on his hands, Dan turned to fellow SNL alum turned movie star, Bill Murray, who readily agreed to the part, but who wouldn't officially commit to filming until the absolute last possible moment, something that had apparently become kind of a habit for Murray. To direct, Aykroyd set his sights on Ivan Reitman, a canny pick, as Reitman was the Canadian mastermind who had produced Animal House and directed 2 big comedy hits starring Bill Murray, Meatballs and Stripes. Reitman took one look at the script and realized it needed major changes to ground it in some sort of reality. He wanted to set it in the present, in the real world, and make it a movie about starting a business. Aykroyd readily agreed and was even happier when Reitman suggested bringing on Harold Ramis to help with the script. Ramis had been a writer on Animal House, Meatballs, and Stripes, and since he'd worked so well as an actor opposite Murray on Stripes, Reitman thought they may as well add him to the cast too. As the trio worked to revise the script, Reitman brought the idea to Columbia Pictures, who had made Stripes. Columbia head Frank Price loved the idea, but the studio's new corporate owners, Coca-Cola, were concerned. After all, the conventional wisdom at the time was that comedy movies could only make so much money at the box office, and a big special effects-driven comedy like Aykroyd and company were proposing, well, that had only been tried once before, with 1941. And Coca-Cola absolutely did not want another 1941 on their hands. Still, they finally agreed so long as the budget was kept under control and that the movie would be ready in 10 months for a summer 1984 debut. Aykroyd, Reitman, and Ramis all agreed but would later regret the limitations. They'd never made a movie like this before, and they vastly underestimated the time and money needed to make all of it, and in particular the special effects, come together. It's no surprise to tell you that the finished movie did in fact release on time, but everyone involved would feel the pressure of the clock throughout the production. Complicating matters on the effects front was that this was still the early days of what we now think of as a big special effects movie. And there was really only one company in town that could create the kind of effects that the Ghostbusters needed. And that was George Lucas's Industrial Light and Magic, or ILM. And ILM was already busy filming Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. But the Ghostbusters caught a break in the form of ILM employee Richard Edlund. When ILM was founded to create the revolutionary effects for Star Wars, it was a loose group of artists marching to the beat of their own drum. The success of Star Wars and the success of ILM led the fledgling company down the road of respectability and corporatization. Edlund, who had been one of the top artists on Star Wars, and many of his colleagues chafed under the new structure at ILM and were eager to strike out on their own. Frank Price convinced the board at Columbia to finance Edlund, allowing him to create a new rival special effects studio purely for the purposes of there being someone who could make the effects for Ghostbusters. The team was constantly under the gun of both time and money, and many of the effects were barely finished on time. Not that you can really tell all that much from looking at the picture, which is a veritable showcase from the height of practical movie effects. The special effects team's premier creation, though, is undoubtedly Slimer.
It's right here, Ray. It's looking at me.
He's an ugly little spud, isn't he?
I think he can hear you, Ray.
Don't move. It won't hurt you. Batman, what happened? Are you okay?
He slimed me.
That's great. Actual physical contact. Can you move?
Ray, come in, please.
I feel so funky.
The famed Green Ghost went through a number of different designs, as notes trickled in from Aykroyd and the rest. Finally, the night before the final Slimer puppet was to be approved, word came down that Aykroyd wanted the ghost to look just like his departed friend, John Belushi. Artist Steve Johnson didn't know what to do. The puppet was finished and didn't look anything like Belushi. After fretting for hours, he finally decided to just lie and say that, yes, he had designed the creature to look like the Animal House star. Aykroyd and the rest were fooled. They thought that the creature looked great and that it did resemble Belushi. Slimer required a crew of 6 people to operate his face and another to wear the puppet and act as its arms. Interestingly, no one in the movie calls him Slimer, and in the script, he's referred to as the onion-headed ghost, due to a deleted scene where he scares a couple with a foul smell. He wouldn't get the name Slimer until the popular Ghostbusters cartoon series. Joining Slimer on screen were Aykroyd, Ramis, and Murray, who did finally sign the contract as Ray, Egon, and Venkman. Ernie Hudson played the fourth Ghostbuster, Winston Zeddemore, a character designed to be a regular Joe and the outsider point of view character for the audience. Hudson was disappointed to see his part shrink over the course of the production. In earlier drafts of the script, Winston first showed up about 20 minutes into the movie. By the time the shooting started, though, the character wouldn't arrive until nearly the 1 hour mark, and most of his best lines had been given to Murray. Rick Moranis took the role of accountant Louis Tully, a character that had been written for John Candy. But Candy and Reitman couldn't agree on the characterization. Candy, believe it or not, wanted to play the character with a thick German accent. When the two couldn't come eye to eye, Moranis was hired instead, and it was ultimately Moranis who decided to make the character a lovable dork. The original screenplay featured absolutely no female characters, so Reitman wisely added a couple, including Rye secretary Janine, played wonderfully by Annie Potts, and Dana, as played by Sigourney Weaver. Weaver actually made an important contribution to the story. The three writers had been struggling with the whole keymaster gatekeeper part of the script. Weaver suggested that her character should become possessed and even turn into one of the giant dogs.
Are you the keymaster?
Not that I know of.
Are you the keymaster?
Yes. I'm a friend of his. He told me to meet him here.
Zool and those dogs were ultimately under the direction of the movie's villain Gozer, played by Yugoslavian actress and model Slavita Jovan, with a voice provided by Patty Edward, a voice actor also known for playing Flotsam and Jetsam in The Little Mermaid. Believe it or not, though, Aykroyd originally wanted Pee Wee Herman to play the part of Gozer. Ghostbusters premiered June 7, 1984, and was an immediate blockbuster hit, earning $230 million at the American box office, and beating out Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom to become the #1 film of the summer. A handful of sequels have followed, as did that popular cartoon series. Throughout all of these sequels and spin-offs and reboots, there have been two constants: Slimer and the car.
Everybody can relax. I found the car. Needs some suspension work and shocks and brakes, brake pads, lining, steering box, transmission, rear end. How much? Only $4,800. Maybe new rings, also mufflers, a little wiring.
Known as the Ecto-1 or Ectomobile, it was a customized 1959 Cadillac Miller Meteor Futura ambulance. The script called for the car to be black, but it was changed to white so it could show up better in night scenes. A popular car with fans and audiences, it no doubt would have been the most famous car of the 1980s, if not for this one.
What did I tell you? 88 miles per hour! The terminal displacement occurred exactly 1:20 a.m. in 0 seconds!
Ah, Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, Doc, you disintegrated Einstein.
Calm down, Marty. I didn't disintegrate anything. The molecular structure of both Einstein and the car are completely intact.
Where the hell are they?
The appropriate question is, when the hell are they? You see, Einstein has just become the world's first time traveler. I sent him into the future. 1 minute into the future, to be exact. And precisely 1:21 a.m. in 0 seconds, we shall catch up with him at the time machine.
Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me that you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
Back to the Future was the brainchild of director Robert Zemeckis and his writing partner, Bob Gale. The two Bobs. At this point, they had already made two well-regarded pictures together. Used Cars and I Want to Hold Your Hand, a comedy about a group of teenagers trying to make it to the Ed Sullivan Show to see the Beatles. The duo had been batting around an idea for a time travel movie for some time called Professor Brown Visits the Future, but had never been able to find a good hook for the story. Then, one day, while visiting his parents, Gale found his father's old high school yearbook and learned for the first time that his father had been president of his senior class. Now, Gale hated the guy that was the president of his own senior class, and that got Gale to wondering, if he had gone to high school with his father, would the two of them have been friends? Would he have been friends with his mother in high school? It was an interesting idea, and he shared it with Zemeckis, who loved the idea, and the two quickly realized that they had at long last found their hook. A movie about a kid who goes back in time and goes to high school with his parents.
What? You're George McFly. Yeah, who are you?
They shared their idea and an early script with their friend Steven Spielberg, who loved it. The trio had become close after Zemeckis had showed Spielberg his USC student film early in Spielberg's career, and since then, Spielberg had championed the two Bobs, producing their two films and even hiring him to write one of his own. Unfortunately, the movie he hired them to write was 1941. Spielberg very much wanted to produce this time travel movie now called Back to the Future, but Zemeckis and Gale were reluctant. They didn't want to be known as the guys who could only get jobs making movies because of their friend Steve. They also realized that after the failure of 1941, if their next project together also failed, it could mean the end for all of their careers.
Whoa, this is heavy.
There's that word again, heavy. Why are things so heavy in the future? Is there a problem with the Earth's gravitational pull?
Zemeckis and Gale began shopping the idea around to studios, most of whom loved the script. In fact, to this day, the Back to the Future screenplay is still regarded as a masterpiece of the form, particularly for the way it handles setups and payoffs, by which I mean everything big that happens later on in the movie is set up earlier in the script by a smaller incident or line. The scene where Marty invents skateboarding is set up by seeing him skateboard at the beginning of the film. The scene where he introduces rock and roll at the Enchantment Under the Sea dance is set up by multiple earlier scenes of him playing rock and roll. The lightning bolt hitting the clock tower is set up by a lady raising funds to restore the clock tower. And even the scene of Marty and his mom in a parked car is set up earlier in the movie.
I'm not your answering service while you're outside pouting over the car. Jennifer Parker called you twice.
I don't like her, Marty. Any girl who calls up a boy is just asking for trouble.
Oh, Mother, there's nothing wrong with calling a boy.
I think it's terrible. Girls chasing boys. When I was your age, I never chased a boy or called a boy or sat in a parked car with a boy.
Then how am I supposed to ever meet anybody?
Despite the script, the studios were reluctant to greenlight anything from the writers of 1941. Zemeckis realized that if he wanted to make this movie, he was going to need to direct a hit movie of his own without any input for Spielberg, and decided that he would accept the very next halfway decent script that came his way. Fortunately for Zemeckis, that script was Romancing the Stone.
Well, you said you just lost everything you owned.
Not my sense of humor.
Well, I'll pay you $100. $200.
I'll do it. For $5.
What? I'll pay you $250.
Now, I ain't cheap.
but I can't be had. My minimum price for taking a stranded woman to a telephone is $400.
Will you take $375 in traveler's checks?
American Express?
Of course.
Got a deal.
I Want to Hold Your Hand and Used Cars were both well regarded, but lost money. 1941 made money, but didn't live up to expectations and was a critical bomb. Romancing the Stone, however, was the first Zemeckis movie that was not only a hit with critics and audiences, it was a massive success, grossing more than $100 million. With this big a hit under his belt, Zemeckis could now do whatever he wanted. And what he wanted was Back to the Future, which Universal Studios was now only too happy to make.
Doc, you're my only hope.
Marty, I'm sorry, but the only power source capable of generating 1.21 gigawatts of electricity is a bolt of lightning.
What did you say?
A bolt of lightning. Unfortunately, you never know when or where it's ever going to strike.
We do now.
The success of Romancing the Stone also means that Zemeckis and Gale no longer had to worry about living in Spielberg's shadow. So they reached back out to their friend and brought him on to produce. With the script already largely in place, it was time to cast the film. Marty's parents were played by Leah Thompson and Crispin Glover. Crispin Glover was an actor who had appeared in several sitcoms and in the movie Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter. A passionate actor known for eccentric performances, Glover created an unforgettable character in George McFly, but often clashed with Zemeckis and Gale on the set. Because of this, he was the only major cast member to not return for the Back to the Future sequels. Instead, Zemeckis and Gale used another actor, Jeffrey Weissman, largely writing the George McFly character out of the scripts, but using Whiteman as a stand-in while wearing a false chin, cheekbones, and sunglasses, and even shooting him upside down, all to disguise the fact that he wasn't Crispin Glover and to make the audiences feel like he was Crispin Glover. Glover was rightfully outraged by the cinematic tricks and sued the producers for using his likeness without his permission. As a result, there are now rules within the Screen Actors Guild which prevent producers from using makeup and other tricks to suggest the appearance of another actor without that actor's permission. Leah Thompson was born in Rochester, Minnesota. A professional ballerina, she turned to acting when Mikhail Baryshnikov himself told her that she didn't have the right body type to be a prima ballerina. She moved to New York and began appearing in Burger King commercials alongside Elizabeth Shue and Sarah Michelle Gellar.
From now on, your troubles will be out of sight. So have yourself a merry little Christmas now. Merry Christmas, McDonald. Happy New Year. Happy holidays, everyone.
Her movie debut came with Jaws 3D, where she plays a member of the water ski team for a SeaWorld-style amusement park. Now, Leah did not know how to water ski and lied about the skill to get the part, which meant that she had to learn a series of complicated water ski routines in just a couple of days. Leah played various versions of Marty's mother, Lorraine McFly, in the Back to the Future movies, and has said that her favorite version was the alternate reality Lorraine from Back to the Future Part 2.
Mom? Mom, that can't be you.
Oh, yes, it's me, Marty. Are you all right?
I'm fine. It's just that you're so big.
Oh, everything's gonna be fine, Marty. Are you hungry? I can call room service.
Room service?
Christopher Lloyd played Doc Brown, Marty's friend and the inventor of the time machine. Lloyd was already a fairly well-known character actor, having played parts in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, as well as a Klingon commander in Star Trek III, and was most famous for playing Reverend Jim on the sitcom Taxi, a role for which he won 2 Emmy Awards.
What does a yellow light mean? Slow down. Okay. What? Why me?
Slow down.
Okay. What does a yellow like me?
Slow down.
Lloyd was one of the few people who did not like the Back to the Future script and was ready to turn it down in favor of appearing in a new play. A friend convinced him to reread the script, and that, along with a meeting with Zemeckis, encouraged him to change his mind and take the part.
Tell me, future boy, who's president of the United States in 1985?
Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan? The actor? Then who's vice president? Jerry Lewis?
I suppose Jane Wyman is a first lady.
Whoa, wait, Doc!
And Jack Benny is secretary of the Treasury.
Doc, you gotta listen to me.
I got enough practical jokes for one evening. Good night, future boy.
No, wait, Doc. Doc, the bruise in your head. I know how that happened. You told me the whole story. You were standing on your toilet, and you were hanging a clock, and you fell, and you hit your head on the sink. And that's when you came up with the idea for the flux capacitor, which is what makes time travel possible.
Zemeckis and Gale thought Michael J. Fox would be the perfect actor for the lead role of Marty McFly. Already a household name due to his breakout performance in Family Ties, Michael's real name is actually Michael Anthony Fox, and he is credited in his earliest roles as simply Michael Fox. When he came to LA, though, he found there was already an actor named Michael Fox, and Screen Actors Guild rules insist that there can only be one actor who goes by a given name to prevent confusion. He didn't like the idea of being called Michael A. Fox because he didn't want to be, well, Michael A. Fox, and so he settled on Michael J. Fox. When it came time to shoot Back to the Future, Family Ties was at the peak of its popularity, with roughly 1 in 3 Americans tuning into the sitcom each week. When Zemeckis and Gale approached the Family Ties producers about the possibility of Michael starring in their film, the bosses at Family Ties refused to let Michael even see the script because they felt that he was too important to the show to have him running off and shooting a movie. Much like Ghostbusters, Back to the Future was under pressure to begin filming by a certain date, and so Zemeckis and Gale resigned themselves to casting their second choice, actor Eric Stoltz, who had appeared in a number of small parts in a number of films, including as Leah Thompson's love interest in a movie called The Wildlife. Stoltz played Marty McFly for 5 entire weeks of shooting, filming many of the movie's major scenes. And while Stoltz was hardly bad, Zemeckis had to admit that something just wasn't working. He showed the footage to Spielberg, who had to agree. Stoltz's style of performing, particularly when it came to comedy, just didn't mesh with their idea for the film. Zemeckis, Gale, and Spielberg and Universal agreed to a highly unusual plan, something as unthinkable then as it is now. They were prepared to scrap all 5 weeks of filming and start all over again with a new star at the cost of hundreds of thousands of dollars. They approached the Family Ties producers again, who finally agreed to let Michael see the script and even take the role on the condition that he not only keep shooting Family Ties, but that he make that show the priority. Michael jumped at the chance, eager to break into movies, and especially one as obviously clever and exciting as Back to the Future. He'd already starred in a couple of films, notably Teen Wolf, but he hated that movie and the experience. Back to the Future, he felt, was a chance to be in something special. To make the schedule work, Back to the Future shifted to shooting on nights and weekends. Michael would have to work on Family Ties Monday through Friday from 10 to 6. He would then jump into the back of a station wagon, which was specially outfitted with a mattress, and be driven to Universal Studios, where he would then work on Back to the Future from 7 p.m. to 4 a.m. The exhausting schedule lasted for 2 months, but the spark that Michael brings to the film is absolutely undeniable.
Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Make her complexion like peaches and cream. Give her 2 weeks like roses over. Then tell me that my lonesome nights are over. Sandman, I'm so alone. Don't have nobody to call. Turn on your magic beam. Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream.
Much of the film was shot at Universal Studios, where the backlot played home to the town of Hill Valley. This particular square and the famous clock tower have actually appeared in dozens of movies and TV shows, including Bye Bye Birdie, Leave It to Beaver, Gremlins, and To Kill a Mockingbird. Believe it or not, early drafts of the script didn't feature the famous DeLorean at all. Instead, Doc Brown used a sort of time ray to send Marty into the past, and the climax involved going to an atomic testing site, with Marty hiding inside of an old refrigerator in order to get blasted back to the future. An idea that Spielberg liked so much that he ended up putting a similar scene into Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. When Zemeckis and Gale decided to make the time machine mobile, a car seemed like the perfect choice. And the pair found themselves attracted to the DeLorean, due to its gull-wing doors, which they thought were distinctive and futuristic. The production needed 3 DeLorean time machines. The so-called Hero car, which featured all of the designs and electronics and could be used for exterior close-ups. A car for driving shots and stunt work, the B car, that looked fine from far away but was actually rigged with special safety equipment. And the C car, which could be taken apart for the various shots of the interior. Interestingly, these were 3 of the only 9,000 DeLoreans ever produced. You see, the DeLorean was made by the DeLorean Motor Company, which had gone out of business in 1982. After a series of financial setbacks and a lack of interest in the cars, and a scandal that involved founder John DeLorean, $24 million worth of cocaine, and undercover FBI agents. By the time the movie was made, the car was seen as a sort of passé oddity from a failed car company. Today, the cars are highly prized by collectors and customizers who want to drive a piece of movie history. Back to the Future premiered July 3rd, 1985, and was an enormous hit with critics and audiences, earning $381 million at the box office. And, like Indiana Jones and Ghostbusters before it, has gone on to become an absolute cultural phenomenon, with sequels, a cartoon series, and even a theme park ride.
Hold on a minute. I can get to it. What? My time travel volunteers. You and you and you. You're my only hope. The 8-passenger DeLorean is just beyond that door where you're standing. I can pilot by remote control from here, but I'm gonna need you to help me navigate. You've got to catch Biff. The fate of the entire universe rests in your hands. Now try and relax while we go over a few vital safety instructions.
Here are a few safety tips you should know before taking off.
Watch your head as you step into the time travel vehicle. Once in, slide to the furthest seat. Adults, watch your head as the ceiling slopes down in the back. Remain seated. The safety restraint will be activated by one of Doc Brown's assistants. Keep your arms and legs away from the door. Take extra care that cameras and other personal belongings do not interfere with the safety restraint. No photography is permitted during the ride.
All three of these movies helped define moviegoing, not just for the 1980s, but for decades to come. Whether it's through sequels, references, or movies inspired by their plots and characters, or even just through the increasingly blockbuster-centric marketplace that is moviegoing today. They are remarkable, special films with immortal performances that have become indelible parts of our pop culture and are guaranteed to be with us for decades to come. I want to thank you for joining me tonight for this look at these three massive motion picture blockbusters that certainly influenced me in my youth and remain favorites of mine to this very day, as I'm sure they do for many of you. If you enjoyed this class, please take a moment to like this video, comment on this video, and subscribe to the Movie Man Eric YouTube channel. You can also, if you would like, email me at eric@northmetrotv.com. That way you can be informed of any new classes that we have on the horizon. For the first time in a long time, things are starting to look more and more promising that we may be able to begin hosting live in-person classes again in the not so distant future. I'm very much looking forward to that. For those of you who are longtime fans and attendees of my classes, I miss doing these classes live and seeing you all in person. And I'm very much looking forward to the opportunity to do that again. The Movie Man Eric YouTube channel will remain, and I intend to continue to update it with, at the very least, the mini classes that I've been putting up here. But if you want to keep informed and up to date about those new live in-person classes, do make sure to join that email list. Thank you again all so much for tuning in and watching. I'll see you next time, and until then, please do stay safe.